I would like to introduce the next speaker, the lunch speaker. So you're very welcome to keep eating. That's what this hour is all for. But while you're eating, Marsha Taichman, the visual resources librarian here at Cornell, she will give a talk about presentation skills. And I think you're going to start with a YouTube video.
Yeah, I'll start with the YouTube video. Like Henrik said, thank you. It's nice to see you guys.
That there's some things I hate about PowerPoint, and I figure it's kind of my duty to point them out. So here we go. Here's common PowerPoint mistakes. Number one, people tend to put every word they are going to say on their PowerPoint slides. Although this eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately this makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring. You will lose your audience's attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Please don't do that anymore, please. Number two, most common, many people do not run spell check. Big mistake. Nothing makes you look stupider than spelling errors. If it's got a red line under it, recheck the spelling. And then finally, I hate this. Avoid excessive bullet pointing, only key points. Too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters. Hence the bullet point. Bad color schemes, not good. Clashing background and font colors can lead to distraction, confusion, headache, nausea, vomiting, and loss of bladder control. I can't stay on that one too long. Here's something I've noticed. The number of PowerPoint slides you have in your talk, the less useful your talk actually is. Unfortunately, my presentation is right there. I've also noticed this. People love to pack data into their presentations. They shove more and more data thinking it's better, but it's not. The more data you have, the harder it is to read your slide, and the effectiveness plummets. Now you can improve the effectiveness by adding some shading and some 3D effects, and then some second order and third order effects, and then, I know, let's add some labels. That'll help a lot. And that's pretty much every marketing slide I've ever seen right there. Yeah. Then some like VP of marketing standing there going, it's real clear in Q4. What the hell are you talking about? Now, I'm into in animation. People become animators in PowerPoint. You can have things flying all over the place, and that can be good. If you're a visual learner, that will improve the effectiveness of your performance. But if you're easily distracted, more animations, and people have no idea what you're talking about. They're just, wow, that is cool, wow. And there's regions here, by the way. There's the simple but effective region. There's the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless, the ADD only region, the useful but amusing, the stupid but confusing, the dull triangle, the hyper triangle, the sleepy square, the dizzying pentagon, and everything else I just call pointless motion. That slide right there took me an hour and a half to make, right there. PowerPoint can just suck the life out of you. It's amazing. I've also come up with this. It's a kind of a little science I've invented called font analysis. Basically, the font you choose says something about who you are as a person. There's a huge list of fonts, and you choose one, and that says something about you, so be careful the font you choose. For example, if you choose Courier New, it happens to be my favorite, you're probably organized and structured. If you choose Matisse, it means you're artistic. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default. Oh. A lot of Times New Roman people. Welcome. We have some more. If you use freehand script, you're a horrible speller, so you try to hide it with a hard-to-read font. Very smart. If you use Gothic, it means you're very pale and you wear black. And if you choose Wingding, it means you're a nerd and you have no life. In fact, if you know what those symbols mean, you will never have a date. Trust me. Don't bother.
So, have any of you seen presentations like that? Like the ones that Don McMillan is talking about? Have any of you given presentations like the ones that Don McMillan is talking about? Oh, let me pull up my slides. So, like Henrik said, I'm Marsha Taichman, and I am the Visual Resources Librarian here. I'm situated in the College of Architecture and Planning, but I work with people all over campus. And ways that I can probably be most helpful to you are in finding images. If you're having problems finding an image for your research in general or for presentations, that's something that I can help you with, definitely. And the other way is if you're giving presentations, if you're preparing a presentation, I will help you with your slides. If you want me to look over your entire slide deck, I'd be happy to do that. If you want to help just looking over different slides to see if they make sense, I'm readily available and very excited to do that. So you have a handout from me, and my contact information is on the top of it, as well as some other library guides, one about designing effective presentations. So a lot of the content that I talk about today is on that guide. And one that we've really worked hard on, a bunch of us, is finding images, about finding images, copyright considerations, citing images. There's really a lot of information on that second guide. And then there's some other resources in the bibliography. And on the back, there are the 10 tips I'm going to talk about today that actually sort of mimic what Don McMillan was talking about in different respects. Things like fonts and using fewer elements on each slide. So we'll go through those together. I wanted to say to you, I have less than an hour of content. So if you just feel really free to interrupt me at any point, ask me questions. If you have comments, just let's go with it. It'll be good. So I am operating from the premise that we want to make good visual presentations. And this is a quote from an advertising director who says, the more strikingly visual your presentation is, the more people will remember it. And more importantly, they will remember you. And it's not about making a pretty set of slides that people will just enjoy. It's about good visual communication. It's another way to be conveying your ideas and supporting your research. So that's where I'm coming from. It's really based in the visual, everything that I'm talking about today. So the idea of the visual being important, even in disciplines like sciences and engineering, is a huge one. And there was a study done at the University of Bordeaux where 54 wine experts were given 2 wines to taste, a red and a white. The trick was that the red wine was the exact same white wine with red dye in it. All of these experts started talking about the tannins and the berries and the red, and it was really the exact same wine as the white. And it just shows how your vision really shapes your perception and then informs your reality. Just one of many examples. Oh. Sorry. Oh no, I'm sorry. Let me, should I just okay, we'll just, good. Oh, you're gonna fix it? That's great. So this is what's called picture superiority effect, or why a picture is worth a million words, a good picture, as well as how using an image with your slide can make the content of your slide 6 times more memorable. And so we'll just see another little video. I like video a lot. I like having kind of multimedia examples so that people don't have to just listen to you. They can listen to other things as well, if they're relevant. So let's talk about this slide. Where do your eyes go first? The strawberries. And I think there's a bunch of text on this slide. I know earlier you were talking about having no more than 6 points on a slide. But I find that even 2 on this slide are kind of a lot. So if I'm up here talking to you about the health benefits of strawberries, and I have all these points I want to read to you, I want to tell you about the calories and the vitamins in them, the flavonoids. You're both listening to what I'm saying and reading what's on the screen and trying to absorb the picture. And that's a lot that's going on. Not to mention everything else you guys have going on, your lunches, the other things that you're thinking about. There's just so much distraction when you're giving a presentation, potentially. So what I would advocate for, well, I'm going to say what I really advocate for at the end, but just trying to simplify things and have just 1 point on each slide. So this is the title of the last slide. And then here's the Latin name for strawberries and a little bit about the caloric value for them, which is still important. And you have this one image that you can use throughout the presentation or throughout that series of slides. So you could also, what I would say, this is the last point, just have the image up and talk about those points. And you could use a handout to put any of the really salient information down in that you could distribute to people if that's really important for them to remember. If they really need to leave the room knowing that there are 45 calories in a cup of strawberries. Does that make sense? Does anybody want to contest that? Because I feel like this is a field, when I work with scientists on presentations, there are all of these considerations that I don't always even know about, like the things have to be included, or some disciplines require having the Cornell logo at the bottom of the screen, or anybody who sponsored them. And there are different reasons that you can't do what I'm saying, which is flood a slide with an image, make it about the image, and then you can talk to people about what you want to. But I know it's hard sometimes.
I would, the equivalent for the sciences might be that you have one graph that you put up and no text, and then talk around the graph. Right.
That's perfect. So I'm advocating, if you do use text, in using all of those 6 points, 8 points, however many, but just using one at a time on each slide, maybe having some kind of a background. Or no background if nothing's relevant, but just making sure that when I'm talking about this, it's what's on the screen, rather than having a whole bunch of text that people could be reading and thinking about. Making things kind of more simple. Yeah.
If you are EA, for example, teaching,
yeah.
So a lot of slides like this to make the notes very messy. Just because no.
Right. And you think that would be messy?
I think so. If you are trying to print out the slides.
Oh, right. So basically what I'm saying is I'm talking about presentations in a way that if you were printing out the slides for a class, for a teacher's class, a teacher prepares them, that those slides would be almost illegible because there isn't enough text. Or there's a little bit of text and you get the salient points, and you have many, many slides potentially rather than just 6 with all the content on it. In Don McMillan's sort of parody, he said, that the information, the amount of information decreases with the amount of slides, and I disagree with that. That's one point that he makes that I think that it doesn't matter how many slides you have unless there's some kind of a guideline for how many you can have in a given presentation at a conference or what have you. But if it feels like having images can be too messy, just using less text on each slide. Does that seem reasonable? Do other people have thoughts or ideas or yeah?
What about animated text? So like suppose you have your 2 or 3 health facts about strawberries and you want to include them but introduce them sequentially.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I feel very good about that. I feel very, very good about that. Although potentially somebody could have tuned out for a second and not still have to be reading at different points. But the only animation that I advocate for is a peer. Yeah, and we'll see it later in this presentation. Just having things pop up one at a time to make the whole list, because it helps guide people through the presentation. So I think that that can be a really great technique. Yeah, other
I
thoughts?
just want to see like how many strawberries in one house.
Oh, that's a great question. If you're cutting them up or if they have the spaces in between each of the fruits. I don't know. This is not my research. This was something sort of scientific that I wanted you to
Because
see.
you mentioned one house,
No,
45, how many?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Yeah. Did other people have questions or thoughts or comments about this? It's something we'll keep coming back to. Yeah.
Do you think the pictures like detracts visually from the text that you're trying to present because it's like right like in your face, I guess?
I don't think so, but that could be a personal preference. I think that people have a much easier time absorbing images quickly, especially if there's something really concrete like strawberries that you recognize from the everyday world. You're going to understand that the strawberries are strawberries before you can read what the content says, especially if you're bombarded like this. So I would say no. Yeah. Jill.
I have a question. In
Yeah.
the library world, we're teaching people how to search databases. So if I'm teaching someone how to search PubMed, I can't really put up a beautiful picture. I've got to put up the screen of PubMed.
Right. In that situation, I think you should have a screenshot of PubMed, but make sure that if you're going through a presentation and you're not doing live searches, to make sure that you have circles around things or enlarge the screen to show different parts. Again, just really having lots of different images to guide people through. And that could be the same with different research of parts of graphs showing only some of the data rather than a whole bunch. Yeah, did other people have thoughts? These are great comments and questions. Okay, so what the audience sees essentially is whatever you have on the screen. What the audience hears is what you're talking about. You'll probably have some notes for your presentation that you can have in case you forget different points. And what the audience takes away is a handout. So I'm a big advocate for handouts because I think you can put some of the really salient information on a piece of paper or a series of pieces of paper that people can leave with and look over, and then it prevents them from potentially writing a ton of notes if you give them the handouts in the beginning. And it also ensures that you have conveyed certain points that you think are really important. Did people have questions about handouts? I usually get a lot of questions about handouts. If you think of one, just you can talk about it. So the very first point I'm mentioning is to limit the text and bullet points in your presentation. It's not to say to never use them, but only when they're really relevant to what you're saying. Avoid sliduments or kind of monuments to your documents, to your research. Slide presentations have a lot more to do with animation, with moving image and sound, or films even with dialogue and other moving images. So just thinking about them really, your presentations really graphically, really visually. And this is one example of using text, just a sort of short, very relevant quote to potentially whatever you're talking about, rather than having a whole bunch of text on a slide. And what I'm advocating for is basically having one image for one idea, or even just one point that you're making on each slide. And I know that finding the images is a lot of work. So you're not alone. You have people like me here to support you in finding images and helping with your research and helping put together your presentations. Presentations take so long to put together, in my experience. And so you really have to build that time in before you're doing a presentation and think about sort of refining things as you go along. But again, I'm definitely here to help you at any point with that. So using quality images. What do I mean by quality images? Yeah, high resolution. Also that are relevant to your research, not just something pretty or, kittens. People like kittens a lot of the time, having cute like memes and stuff. It can have, there are places for that, even in presentations sometimes, but just making sure that you're not just putting something up, having a sunset in the background to make people feel calm or whatever, that the images relate to your research, but definitely high quality images. And again, on the handout, we have this library guide for finding images, and there's a lot of content that we're updating often, especially in terms of image databases that we have at Cornell and that are available on the open web, free images and stock images being images oftentimes that you can pay for. So where do you guys look for images? Yeah, it's a big one. Google Images is a big one. Anywhere else?
Flickr?
Flickr. Do any of you use different databases that have images relevant to your particular areas of research? Yeah? Great. And are they usually pretty high, good enough quality that? Yeah, that's great. So I wanted to mention one that Jill just mentioned, Flickr, and also Wikimedia Commons, because you have to think about where your images are coming from, especially if you're presenting in public, if you're publishing your research in public rather than just within the academic community at Cornell. And in that case, you're going to want to use images that are available for you to use, that are fair use. So in Flickr, all the images, both Flickr and Wikimedia Commons, they have Creative Commons licenses. Does anybody know about Creative Commons licensing? Great, Jeremy. This is, you'll talk more about copyright later this afternoon, maybe right after this. And well, images are sort of they can be very difficult to deal with copyright wise. And I can also help you with this, as can the Copyright Center, if there's an image you really want to use for a presentation or for publication. Publication is especially important. So the ones with Creative Commons licenses, like the ones found on Flickr and Wikimedia Commons, you're able to use them if you understand sort of the icons that come with them or the rubric that accompanies them. And this is using a peer. So attribution by means, if you see an image on Wikimedia Commons that has attribution, it means you just have to reference the photographer. You have to make sure that you're citing that person and giving credit where it's due. And all of that information is usually right with the images. Non-commercial, and it can be a combination of many of these or any of these. Non-commercial is for educational use is great, nothing you can make money off of. No derivative works, meaning you have to use the work exactly as it is. You can't take a color image and change it to black and white or use only a portion of an image. You're supposed to use the image in its entirety. And the last one is share alike, meaning if you're posting this on the internet, say, the image on a blog, make sure that you post that image with an open license that people can use in the same way you've used it. So sort of paying it forward with the image. Does that make sense? Do people have questions about that? Comments? Okay. Back to quality images. If you're going to do something like I did with the strawberries and flood an entire screen with an image, you're going to want to choose an image that's at least 1064 pixels, so in between the 800 and the 1600, so that it doesn't get too pixelated or distorted. And all of the information about image size for slides is available on the Designing Effective Presentations library guide. So just thinking about, you can use either JPEG or TIFFs. Yeah, just thinking, making sure that your image size is right, because what looks great on your computer, especially sort of in the 200 pixel range, is not necessarily going to look great on your screen. And if you're going to a conference and you have the opportunity to project your slides before your talk, that can be so, so helpful, because you can see if something's cut off at the bottom of the screen, or if something ends up being more blurry or not looking right spatially. That can be really, really advantageous. So, so thinking about that with image quality too. Using fewer elements per slide. So, what's wrong with the slide? Yeah. Different color, different frogs. Yeah, there's a lot of color on this, and some of it really blends in. What else?
Your eye is drawn all over the slide. You're not
Yeah.
sure which is the most important to look at.
Right, and in this box, some of the text is bolded, and why is that text bolded? Like, what's that about? Sometimes people bold things or bold everything, and that can be really confusing. There's a lot of content on this slide, like Jill was saying, with not knowing where to look. So taking a slide like this and maybe choosing one of the points and turning it into something more like this, so that people understand what you're talking about, just making things clear, making things more more visually compelling and relevant. And there are other things that you can do. You could play with font density and colors a little bit. You could play with the alignment of the frog, like the frog could be fleeing the slide. But it's always helpful to bring different elements into the center of a composition or a slide, so that people's eyes get drawn in. Do people have things to say, ideas or questions? Okay, so we're taking the 4 basic design principles of contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, and turning them into something a little bit more graphically appealing. The CRAP principle. Making elements different to increase understanding in terms of contrast. Repetition. We're going to talk about coming up with some kind of a template for your presentation, and having visual elements repeating to create a strong unity can be good. Having that same red strawberry background for numerous points while you're talking about strawberries, for instance. Alignment, bringing things in like the frog so that people's eyes go in. And proximity, grouping related items to convey relationships. Has anyone heard of the rule of thirds? Yeah? Can you tell us about it? Oh, either of you, both of you.
Like if you choose like 3 equally spaced lines, you're supposed to put the subject like on like the right third of the screen or the left third of the screen, it's like that front and center.
So if you have some visual element that you want to put on a slide, and you cut a slide horizontally and vertically into 3, these points, these moments of intersection are the power points. And if you take an element and align it with one of those points, then it will create visual interest. So there's something to be said, and you might have a good instinct to center things, and that's one technique. But to put things a little off center really creates visual interest for people and keeps people invested in your slide. The fourth point is to use a template. And for this presentation, my template is super simple. It's just having two colors that are complementary. We'll talk about that in a second. And I'm just using Gil Sans as a font and using different versions of it, bold and narrow, to create visual interest. And I like doing things like having 10 points so that people know where you are in terms of your presentation, the progression of things. Even just having different section headings in your presentation so that people understand where you are. Occasionally, I'll put a series of dots along the bottom of the slide and then choose a different color and move that color through the dots as you progress through your slides so that people know where you are in your presentation, or having some kind of an indicator of where you are. I like knowing when people are going to be done their presentations or where they are. Just psychologically, it's helpful. Like, this is how long I'm going to have to do this for. Compartmentalizing, I guess. So having some kind of a template. Be wary of PowerPoint templates. Some of them are really great. You can modify things really nicely sometimes, but unless you have a really compelling reason to use some kind of very, very obvious graphic, then I would say avoid it because it can be distracting for people, and you want people to listen to you and not just have to figure out your slides. So carefully choose color. Black and white is never as memorable as color. So unless there's a good reason to use black and white, I didn't mean to go that fast. Unless there's a good reason to use black and white, I would say use color so that people will remember it better. This is the color wheel. I don't know if some of you remember it from like primary school, middle school, but the warm colors advance and the cool colors recede. So if you wanted to have some like warm elements that were coming out, that could be good for text, and having a cool background, like a light blue, would be very visually compelling for people. But they would bring out the heat and the really strong pigment. So using complementary colors like blue and orange. I love the look of having dark slides with light text. I do it a lot, but if you don't know the room that you're presenting in, like today, this would have been a terrible day to have dark slides if we couldn't close all the curtains and stuff. It's easier for people with any kind of visual impairment or whenever there's ambient light in the room to read a light slide with dark text, and having just sort of basic dark text and light backgrounds. Not using too many colors in terms of the text can be helpful. Having things like black and white for some of the big elements is a good thing, I think. Carefully choosing fonts. What's the difference between a serif font and a sans serif font? Do they look pretty similar to you guys? They are, I mean, they're often not that different. A serif font has kind of decorative embellishments. The sans serif font has less. Which do you think would be better for presentations? Yeah, the sans serif fonts. Serif fonts are great to read at small font sizes, like in books or for essays. But when you think about looking at billboards or at signs in subway stations, anything really big, it's easier to read a sans serif font quickly when it's at a large font size. So if you're using a serif font, make sure that you use it kind of sparingly, but it could be good for maybe headings and then sans serif for most of your text, or because you want people to be able to read what's on your slide quickly. You could use all kinds of fonts. I would advise against it, like having these decorative cursive visual literacy letters or anything in all caps makes me feel like people are screaming at me, especially in email, but also in presentations. But even just in my presentation, having one font with Gil Sans, there's so many. And if you choose a really popular font like Arial, Helvetica, you'll get different kinds of fonts in that same family that you can use. And that still creates kind of a visual unity. Do people have questions about anything? Okay. So use legible charts and graphs. I'm so glad that you're going to have a session on data visualization in this, because I'm not spending a lot of time with how to build good charts and graphs. And honestly, it's not my forte. I don't work with people often who use charts and graphs, but we can definitely talk about it if you want to at some point in terms of your own research and putting together presentations. So what can you tell me about this pie chart, this 3D pie chart?
Hard to read.
Yeah,
It's too much.
it's too much. Because it's 3D, which is like, this is a terrible thing to do, have a 3D chart, in my opinion, because it's another thing your eyes have to process, that your mind has to process. So flattening things that haven't, all these things labeled. You can't tell me anything from this chart, basically. So thinking about really reducing things to more simple elements. Here's another bad chart, having a big distracting background. All these different colors. Why are these all different colors? And there's so many labels. It's hard to say what's going on here. So taking this same chart and trying to reduce it to something more simple. And if you're talking about the global revenue of the music industry in 2011, you could make the line or the bar graph part of the graph a different color so that people know you're talking about this particular year. Does that make sense? And again, these are complementary colors, the purple and yellow. So I put them together too. This is a big one for me. But I don't often think there's any reason to use an animation in transition, although I really appreciate people's instincts to try to make things interesting, but just having anything sliding in or flying out or coming down is too much. It's like something else to distract from your content. So I would say, except for Appear, any animations and transitions are not really fantastic, in my opinion. Some people may, I'm not an expert on this either. I'm not a designer. I'm a librarian, but I think about these things a lot. I think about presentations and graphics and making things legible. And in my mind, having animations is not such a great thing. So citing your images. This is really important. And this is something that we think about at the library very, very frequently. It's giving credit where credit is due, essentially, and making sure that you're practicing, you have a good academic practice. So this image is just one from Flickr, but I've credited it right on the slide, and people do that all the time. That can be really great, and if you want to do it that way, do it. I also think that there's merit in having image credits at the end. And something that I think about with image credits is that it can be really, really useful to you, because you can go back to your slides and figure out where you found an image quickly. And it also, if somebody comes up to you after a presentation saying, I really like that image, you have the citation there as well, whether it's on the slide or in a list of image credits. I just like having the images. It feels like one more distraction to have a citation on an image, but it is very good practice. So that's a personal preference too. And then the last thing that I want to talk about is planning analog, going right back to the beginning when you're coming up with a presentation, thinking about it potentially on paper rather than just opening PowerPoint. I find when I'm writing or when I'm doing a presentation, putting together a presentation, I kind of freeze when I get to the screen. And sometimes just drawing things out, like having Post-its and with text and images, can be really helpful in terms of planning, in terms of moving things around, figuring out how you're going to organize your talk. Or you could print out a blank PowerPoint presentation. This is like storyboarding. It's a technique that people use a lot in film, figuring out what's going to happen in each frame. Can be really useful. And I think people respond really well to narratives. And if you think about that when you're putting together your presentation, you can sort of tell a story, even if it's not anything like once upon a time, just moving people through your research in a coherent way that they can understand from beginning to end. Do people have questions about that or anything? Something else I wanted to say is if you just wanted to if you wanted to talk about something and there wasn't anything relevant that you were going to put up, either in terms of words or images, you can just have a blank screen. You could put up a black slide or white slide, just so it's neutral, so that people know not to look at whatever else you have up. Like it's against what I'm doing right now. And it's good practice too to have a clicker if you're going to be moving around a lot, which I don't always do. And I think those are some of the main things that I wanted to say to all of you. So I would love to hear if you have questions or if you have other comments. Yeah. Wow. No, I don't believe so. But we could look into that. I think that there might be, you might have more luck looking online. But we can talk more about that, and I can do research to see if I can find anything about that. Yeah, absolutely. No, really, absolutely. That's a really great question. I don't believe so though, but let's see what we can do. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. What else? What else do people think? Do you have presentations coming up? Have you done presentations recently that have been difficult for you, or? Yeah.
Are you still required to cite yourself as a third source, or is this just assume that it's presenting it?
You're good.
Okay.
I mean, you could say if you wanted to point out that you took the image, but you could, but it's yours and you can do what you want with it. And I'm so glad you brought that up because it's something that I didn't say. But in terms of all of this, you use images. If you can use your own images from your own experiments or your own research, that's going to be much more relevant than finding some other experiment online that's akin to yours. Like it, and you can use it in whatever way you want to. So thinking about using your own images if they're available. Yeah. Yeah.
Follow-up question on the images. You find some of the images online, but you're not satisfied with the quality, and you create or not really create from scratch, but based on those materials, then is that really yours, or you have to say I create based on someone else?
I think that saying you created it based on something else is good practice.
Okay.
You're never going to have a problem if you say that you used somebody else's research or somebody else's graphic to make your own, or not never, but I mean, I think that that's a great thing to do it with it. It really depends on how transformative your work becomes. If it's really completely different from whatever you started with, then there might not be a reason to cite it, or it might even be irrelevant citing it. But for the most part, if you're changing somebody else's image, citing it is fantastic. I think it's great. Yeah. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
We have any examples of presentation of this topic.
Of a fixed topic?
Yeah. An example of the presentation.
Like a whole presentation that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
that's good?
Yeah.
No. I mean, I can give you other presentations that I've worked on a lot to look at with different techniques, but I don't know how good they are. It's not like the best case scenario.
I just want to see that.
Just see a whole good.
Into the end.
Yeah. I mean, there are.
A picture.
Ooh, there's some good examples in books, even in some of the books that are listed on the bibliography. But we could probably find an example of a really good presentation. And again, so much of this is so subjective. Like what I think looks great might not appeal to you, might not be relevant to you in your field. You might have to or want to do things differently. So we could look for presentations that are good together if you want, or I could look for something and try to get back to you with that. Yeah, absolutely.
What about if you use a software to make images? Do you cite the software?
No. I don't think so.
I've never seen it.
I've never seen that done.
But there are like open source softwares. So.
I don't think you have to. No, but you know what? That's a great question. That's a really great question. And I there's a chance I could be wrong, but from what I understand in practice, especially with architecture, because I work with architects a lot, there would be no reason that you would say, I use this software. But very often it could come up in your presentation that was what you used in order to render something. Yeah.
What is your favorite font to use? Or fonts?
I am so glad you asked. Nobody has ever asked. Well, it's not Gil Sans. It's Franklin Gothic book, and it's a sans serif font. There are different versions of it as well, and I use it if I'm doing academic presentations for the most part. I play. That's my favorite, my very favorite for presentations. However, I've used other ones too. Just if I've so many times I experiment with my fonts when they're on the screen. I'll do a slide and then look at it in different font styles to see which works the best. Some end up being really big, and then you have to change the font size. So yeah, Franklin Gothic book. Yeah. Yes, we definitely do, and I can point you to those. Actually, that'd
It's
be
like Identity Cornell. Yeah.
okay.
There's tons of
Black and white, red and red.
Yeah, there's also, see, I'm really glad that Leah and Jill are here. I've never used Cornell's slides. However, being in the College of Architecture and Planning, I have used their branding and their logos at different points, not usually for an entire presentation, but for a final slide or here and there. So this is to say that your college might have a template as well, in addition to Cornell's that you could want to use.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it actually governs us more than it does students. Like if you're presenting your research, you're kind of free to do what you want. I mean, you can include a Cornell thing, say I'm from Cornell, but I think it governs more what we produce as Cornell employees, because it's what we produce. It's a Cornell product, so to speak. Whereas with your research, it's yours.
Yeah.
So you're less bound by like the official rules.
I think something that's come up a lot with students I've worked with in the past, especially more in the sciences, is that they need to have their college branding in some places, and also the sponsorship of whoever gave money to do their research. And we can find ways, if that's a situation for you, we can find ways to work it in so that it's visible but not, dominating slide or something. Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to say it's brand.cornell.
Oh, thank you.
It used to be identity, I'm pretty sure, but now it's brand. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, what you're talking about is more related to style. Very great. And I'm also wondering how to do the scientific presentation for different audience, like
Yes.
for high school student or job marketing or graduate student.
I'm
How to tell a scientific story.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because so often people are doing the same, presenting the same content to different audiences. And you really have to be so cognizant of who you're presenting to, what their knowledge level is. And so just really thinking about what kind of background that they have. I guess it's really, so often the answer is like, it depends, but making sure that you are presenting your information in a way that makes sense to whatever audience you have is such an important thing. And we can talk about that too with your own research if that's something you're interested in. Just choosing the right images, making sure there's the right text on your slides, thinking about exactly what you want to say before you put your slides together, or making sure that those two things correspond. Yeah. Did that answer your question? I don't think so.
Or there's any resources you can put on.
I don't know any resources, but that's a great question. And if you email me, we could look at some together, because that would be helpful for me as well. Yeah, no, absolutely.
I think for us, for a lot of us,
Yeah.
we have graphs to present in presentations, and at some point I experimented with like turning a spectrum, just a line, into like more 2D, 3D structure, and planting one spectrum on top of another and another, for some, only not for in a publication, but for in a presentation. And that I felt jazzed up the presentation.
Yeah.
Because if you have a lot of black and white graphs showing with no color, and symbols that are just as black and white as the line that flows through them.
Right.
That is, if you've seen a few pages of that, that's very boring. But if you have the time to jazz it up with ways like that, or even adding some shading, that can, I think, really help.
Absolutely make it more visually compelling, and also help you understand the data better.
Yeah. But yeah, it depends on whether you have a 5-minute presentation or a 30-minute presentation. In 5 minutes, you can do a lot of jazzing up to get bam, 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 quickly to the point. Whereas for 30 minutes, it would be too much work.
Right.
I would think.
Well, it depends, especially if you're giving a presentation over and over, like a job talk. I think for a lot of fields, your job talk is about your PhD research, and you could have I think it could be well worth your while in really investing in what that presentation looks like, and then modifying it depending on what the context is, what the school is, or what have you. So, yeah, I think if you have time to really think about each of your graphs, and that would be a good thing. Yeah. But I'm sure you're going to hear more about this from Zoe, and who else is talking this afternoon?
Of course, I would know.
So we will be talking tomorrow about Tableau.
Yeah, Tableau is great. Yeah.
Well, if there are no more questions, let's thank Marsha for her presentation.
Thank you, Gabby.